Hi, this is Suzanne Bichard, instructor with American Institute for Paralegal Studies. As we study tort law, it becomes very clear that there are some striking differences between the tort of negligence on the one hand and the intentional torts on the other. So in this lecture, I'd like to discuss the two main differences between negligence and the intentional torts. It might help to look at the elements of some of these torts. First, let's review the elements of negligence. Now, in general, the elements of negligence are, number one, duty, which is the obligation to use reasonable care to avoid injuring the plaintiff; breach of duty, which generally speaking amounts to the failure to use reasonable care; proximate cause, which is the legal responsibility for bringing something about; and harm, that is the actual loss or damage that results from the defendant's failure to use reasonable care. Now, the intentional torts all have various elements, so let's look at a couple of examples of intentional torts to get an idea of how they differ from negligence, and then we'll get into the specifics of the two major differences. For instance, let's look at the elements of the tort of assault. The elements of assault are: the defendant attempts to make unconsented, harmful, or offensive contact with the plaintiff; the plaintiff is actually apprehensive for his or her safety; and the threat of such contact is imminent. As another example of an intentional tort, let's look at the elements of false imprisonment. This is an interesting one. False imprisonment requires confinement without the plaintiff's consent, the defendant's intent to confine the plaintiff, confinement for an appreciable period of time, no reasonable means for the plaintiff to escape from confinement, and in some jurisdictions, the plaintiff's knowledge or awareness of the confinement. So we've looked at a couple of different examples of intentional torts, and we've looked at the elements of negligence. You might already have figured out the number one difference between negligence and the intentional torts. The main difference is intent. With negligence, there's no requirement that the plaintiff prove the defendant intended any harm. Negligence amounts to acting unreasonably under the circumstances and thereby causing harm to someone. By contrast, a person commits an intentional tort against a plaintiff when he or she either specifically desires to injure the plaintiff or knows that injury was substantially certain to result from his or her act, but engaged in the act anyway. It might sound redundant, but you need to remember that intent is an element in all the intentional torts. The second major difference between negligence and the intentional torts is that while punitive damages may be appropriate under some circumstances when you have an intentional tort, the general rule is that punitive damages are not available for acts of simple negligence. Punitive damages are awarded over and above compensatory damages, and they're designed to punish the wrongdoer and to deter similar behavior on the part of the defendant or others. So it really wouldn't seem to serve any societal purpose to try and punish somebody for an act of simple negligence, no matter how serious the injury. So those are the two biggest differences between negligence and the intentional torts. As a paralegal in a civil litigation practice, it'd be a good idea to keep those differences in mind. Now, if you're not currently a student at AIPS, and if you're interested in a career in the law, please check out our website at aips.com.